Hello, and welcome to the Cost of Everything podcast. Today, I'm talking about the costs to build a football stadium, the decisions and cost drivers, and the social value associated with them, which are sometimes controversial and often refutable. The first World Cup I remember watching was in '94 in the US. For some reason, I just remember the Republic of Ireland coach Jack Charlton in a white baseball cap, red of face, having a go at the official on the touchline. I was quite young. Fast forward to the European Championships in 1996, which was happening in England. I didn't actually go to see a match, which I really regret, but I remember the Sea of Orange in Birmingham, all the fans from the Netherlands, and the amazing party atmosphere. If, like me, you've been watching football this season during the pandemic, you might have noticed the impact having no fans in the stadium has made on the overall experience. From a viewing perspective, although we get to hear every cheeky little comment and the occasional scream in dramatic pain when a player is hit with a feather, it just isn't the same. Watching on TV, the commentators seem less interested, the players seem to be lackluster, and don't get me started on the awful fake crowd noises that the TV companies have decided to pipe through to us. A stadium experience is really important for the game. Obviously, watching a sport in a stadium is high on my list of post-pandemic activities, but it also got me thinking, how much do these stadiums cost to build and what drives their cost? So the cost of building a football stadium is quite complex and it depends on where you are in the world. There is a lot to cover about the cost of football stadiums, but I want to give this episode some context. So I'll start with the Football World Cup, one of the largest events in the world, which is happening in Qatar in 2022. And then I'll talk about the general requirements and cost drivers for building stadiums. The scrutiny has been on Qatar and the world governing body of football, FIFA, about the next World Cup. There will be 7 new stadiums, a new airport, a whole new road network incorporating public transport, and even a new city to host the final. The total estimated budget just for the football stadiums, for football pitches and facilities was around $6 billion. That was back in 2014. So this is a new build project, not for retrofitting old stadiums, and you have a fixed deadline for when the World Cup will be hosted. And it's in the Middle East for the first time in history, in a desert, and you're constructing a whole new city for it and associated infrastructure. The World Cup, which half the world will watch, you don't want to mess that up. Despite all the complexities that come from building associated infrastructure, building football stadiums itself is not straightforward. Right from an early stage, the design team need to consider multiple stakeholders, challenging requirements, and competitive timescales. So what are the key challenges? Let's start with the user requirements. No two stadiums are the same. You have different stakeholders, different locations, different functional requirements. For example, building the new Tottenham Hotspur ground in London has a totally different set of needs to building one for the World Cup in Qatar. A football stadium isn't just a building to watch football, and because of that, the development team have to establish the balance between the design, the facilities, and its affordability. Let's keep stakeholders simple for this, looking at 3 different groups. The fans, who are the spectators in the ground, the players and playing staff, and of course the owners. So the fans first of all, who want to have a high quality experience, to watch a great event and to get enjoyment from the direct interaction with each other and the event happening in front of their eyes. Also, from the designer's perspective, the facilities that are available in addition to the event are important, as well as comfort. From a more serious point of view, safety and crowd control are key to effective stadium design. Safety is one of the main reasons for the first phase of stadium enhancements and improvements in the late 1980s and early 1990s. What about the players? They want a great quality football pitch, great in-house facilities, so not just a shed to get changed in, and conditions which will bring out the best in their performance. Atmosphere. This can mean multiple things in sport. The obvious one is the condition of the air. Imagine you're running around for 90 minutes and the air is stale, stagnant and hot. Heat comfort is massively important. The other side of atmosphere is generated by the spectators. A football stadium can be like a cauldron for visitors. Without a great crowd generating a great atmosphere for a great occasion or intimidating the opposite team, you lose a little advantage of being in your home stadium. What about the owner, who has a lot of costs to contend with? They need multiple sources of sustained revenue and profitability. There are TV rights, which are highly lucrative if you're a big team, along with the sponsorships. But if you're a team looking to grow, greater revenue can be achieved by increasing the capacity of the stadium. With a new stadium, you can also increase the number of premium seats and executive private boxes. And you might have supporters in the strangest places that you would never think of that will be able to pay good money for those seats. I kid you not, Michael Jackson's brother, Tito Jackson, is a massive Wolverhampton Wanderers fan. The blog post has a photo. That's random. If you're not a football fan, you might still have heard of Wembley Stadium because it's used for more than just football events. There are non-sporting events such as music concerts. I'm too young to remember, of course, but Live Aid with Queen was a pretty big deal back in the late 1980s. You may have facilities that allow corporate events, hospitality, conferences. You might have on-site hotels or a museum. Other income sources include concession stands, selling food, merchandise, and ground sponsorship, advertising boards, charging for parking even. Adding all these facilities will of course involve other costs for maintenance, operations, and increases the complexity of the design. Though not many of these diverse sources of income I've mentioned will get you through a pandemic where no one is allowed to come to the stadium. One thing I've always thought about when going to stadiums is how inward facing they are. The outside aesthetics never used to be that important. All the action happened on the inward facing side, and the external side just acted as a barrier. But you think of prominent new stadiums and they are designed with external aesthetics in mind. The aesthetics, particularly as part of obtaining planning permission in some places, it's now an important part of the development. Structural elements, of course, such as the roof and the stands, their sheer size make them complex in design, and very easily costs can go spiraling. You have tiers, concourses, stairs, ramps. These also feed into logistics, how people flow in the building and use the spaces. How do you make it so that you have a great view from even the worst seating areas? I've looked into getting tickets, for example, to the Camp Nou in Barcelona, but at the cheapest top elevation, what are you going to see? Although with a capacity of nearly 100,000, it might be more about the experience than watching Lionel Messi in his twilight years. Whereas at the San Siro in Milan, I had a rubbish seat in the middle of a freezing February, no roof cover at all, but I could see Pirlo score a penalty on the other side of the pitch. You can get rubbish seats, but still see every bit of action there. Very cold though. Let's talk about the key cost drivers in building a new football stadium. According to KPMG Football Benchmark, size does matter. The bigger the stadium, the greater the cost. Greater structural cost, a wider roof, more seats, etc., etc. The step-changing cost appears to be once you reach a seating capacity of about 60,000, beyond which costs significantly increase. Other cost drivers obviously include the quality of the materials you use, the additional functionality that we discussed before, and location. Location is inevitably going to be linked to cost. Is the site chosen a greenfield site? Is the current stadium being completely knocked down and a new one erected on the same site? If so, you have demolition costs, groundwork costs, access costs. These are significant variables to each individual stadium. Building a new stadium in a developed area with existing infrastructure and the high cost of the land, labour and materials will make your costs even higher. As mentioned before, Tottenham Hotspur's new ground in London, it's a big stadium, but it has other facilities that make it even more expensive. It has a retractable football pitch, underneath which sits a synthetic NFL pitch. It also hosts concerts, events, and is a cashless stadium. You can see a graphic on the blog post which shows the cost and the cost per seat of some of the major new football stadiums being constructed around the world. You of course have the traditional cost drivers relating to the building itself, so the gross floor area of the stadium complex, where a high area per seat is generally more expensive, but could be lower if the floor is taken up by income generating sources like hotels or retail concessions. You also have to consider the ambition of the club. If they are aiming to be one of the best teams, they have to meet financial fair play criteria, which is tied to how much revenue they can generate. So the more revenue you can generate from the stadium, the more chance you have of signing the best players and becoming a big team. An example of this is Manchester City. So the business case for building a new stadium could hinge on the owner-investor's ambition for the club. The stadium might need to have capacity to allow expansion, Phased incorporation of better larger stands later on could mean a lot of cost. These need to be considered if having a phased approach to investment. Cost and schedule overruns for a stadium build are a major risk for the football club. As a revenue source, every day it isn't being used is a day it costs money. Every day of late completion, not only do you lose out on income, but you have to pay down the cost of capital invested. The business case for investing in the stadium is also influenced by what happens on the pitch, so financing the project can really depend on the performance and popularity of the club. If you get relegated, your revenue streams from TV rights, etc., change completely. The players you can attract, the sponsorships and advertising, a club could go bankrupt because it was highly leveraged and not expected to get relegated. If that's in the mind of a contractor who's bidding for work on a new stadium, they might build that into the bid. Whole life performance is also important for the business case. There is no way the risk of a pandemic and punters not being able to attend match days was considered in the business case for new and old stadiums alike. Stadiums have a lot of fixed operations and maintenance costs, and they are still operating through the pandemic. But a major revenue source, ticket sales, is down for an entire year. The planned life of the stadium is important. In the long term, it may be a liability. Stadiums don't seem to be designed with the end of life in mind or for ease of retrofitting. Although, when you look at the World Cup in Qatar, there is one stadium in Qatar which is being built as a modular construction. Again, link to that is on the website. What about social cost and value? For non-football fans, the local population or at a national level, when you consider major infrastructure investment, the business case isn't just about the financial case for the owner. The social cost and social value are often scrutinized, and rightly so. What social values are considered in the case for building a new football stadium? Well, the value could be realized at a grassroots level, where a new stadium offers the local community access to certain facilities. Let's not forget that a lot of stadiums in the UK in particular and elsewhere are in deprived areas and offer the local community facilities they would not have access to otherwise, and local councils with a potentially steady revenue stream. But when you take major events such as World Cups, there does appear to be a major legacy cost rather than a legacy value. Let's take South Africa, who hosted the World Cup in 2010. They built a whole infrastructure around the stadiums. I think FIFA get the TV rights, money and sponsorships. The government of South Africa hailed the games as a success. There was a positive image for the country, a feel-good atmosphere, a lot of tourism. But what about later on? 9 stadiums were built or retrofitted for the World Cup at a cost of 10 billion rand, and they've struggled to justify the expensive maintenance of these facilities, which goes into the millions a year for some vacant stadiums, which has to be footed by the local municipalities. The long-term intangible benefits that are stated as unquantifiable are a counter-argument to that, but they should be quantifiable. Then we take Brazil in 2014, who notoriously cut down sections of the Amazon to build remote stadiums, with some claiming that local communities were cleared out as well to make way for the building work. $11.7 million were allocated for the World Cup, the subject of mass protests in the country. For one stadium built in the Brazilian capital, Brasilia, the car park was used as a bus station after the World Cup. It's too big a stadium, the smaller clubs claim, who live locally. They can't afford to run the stadiums for a typical match day. One report I read showed that running costs on a match day are around $80,000, whereas the revenue from ticket sales for even the biggest match, the local derby, is around $7,000. Major corruption scandals rocked FIFA and the footballing world recently, bringing a lot of skepticism and negative press around the World Cup as well. FIFA would likely counter this, evidencing the legacy of the games that they leave behind. For example, in Brazil in 2014, there's a legacy fund which invests in different areas of Brazil, supporting competitions for women's and youth football, infrastructure development and education. We also need to consider the cost to human life as well. The construction and development associated with the World Cup in Qatar in 2022 has resulted in the deaths of more than 6,500 migrant workers in the country. So social cost and value is crucial, and it needs to be quantified. We can't get away anymore with saying that these are not measurable. We can obviously find a monetary value to a lot of these things. The business case for building a new stadium is complex, and cost professionals play an important role in establishing the costs, revenues, and scenarios that lead to an optimal investment. The stadium provides a benefit to the local community, provides players with better conditions to show their talent, and spectators with a great event experience. With the World Cup in Qatar in 2022 coming out of a pandemic, there will surely be a massive party atmosphere. But we shouldn't forget that these events come with a cost, sometimes unseen and sometimes not quantified. Thanks for listening to this week's episode. I really appreciate everyone who feeds back and lets me know how we're doing. I really want to find out what kind of things you're interested in as well, what kind of things you want to find out about the cost of everything. Be sure to subscribe on whatever platform you're listening on. The next episode is in 2 weeks' time. Until then, have a great week.